Welcome, video number 2. This is GCE Buddhism at Excel, paper 4. We're looking today at the teaching, the founding of the Sangha, and the Parinibbana. So this is the Buddhist teaching we're doing now. Let's plunge right into it. Kush says, having gained enlightenment, the new Buddha spent some time assimilating his experience in great bliss and deep meditation. Harvey, bit more difficult text, of course, says the Buddha thought that the Dharma, his teaching, he had experienced was so profound and subtle and beyond the sphere of reason that others could not be too subject to attachment to be able to understand it. Take note, students, it's not easy. Even the Buddha recognized some of his deeper teaching was not easy. But at this, Harvey points out, the compassionate God, Brahma Sampati, so the four-headed Brahma Sampati we can see there, whom Buddhist tradition saw as the long-lived non-returner who'd been taught by a previous Buddha, interesting, became alarmed at the thought that a fully awakened person had arisen in the world, but that he might not share his rare and precious wisdom with others. Harvey goes on to say, he therefore appeared before the Buddha and respectfully asked him to teach. For there are beings with little dust in their eyes who are not hearing the Dharma or the King. The dust is one of those kind of little indicators of ignorance. If you've got lots of dust in your house, like the Buddha's palace was full of dust, not a good place to be. But if there's little dust, that's good. Dust is a sort of indication of the things that change, that fall away, that are impermanent. The Buddha then used his mind-reading powers, yes, he has mind-reading powers, to survey the world and determine that some people were spiritually mature enough to understand his message, and so he decided to teach. The first people he teaches, according to this, is Kush now. Kush says the first people he was teaching were two merchants who offered him food as he's still remaining there under the Bodhi tree, and they formally took refuge in the Buddha and his teaching. So actually, the first two Buddhists are these two merchants. We know very little about them. The Buddha found then, later on, he found the 5 ascetics who he had abandoned earlier. And first of all, they tried to ignore him. They thought he was greedy. They thought he'd abandoned the question of enlightenment. But they were surprised by how amazing he looked. And so they forgot about it, and they spoke to him, and they venerated him, they washed his feet, and so on. The Buddha taught them that he had discovered this principle of Dharma, or teaching, the principle of the cosmic order in the universe. You can see on the right here a statue of the Buddha with a murda, or a hand gesture. Notice the fingers together in the symbol of a circle, the turning of the wheel of Dharma, or the beginning of the teaching. And it represents the first sermon the Buddha gives after his enlightenment preached at Sarnath. This first sermon, this setting the wheel in motion of the law, explains in the basics of Buddhism, i.e. the Four Noble Truths. Harvey summarizes it like this. We don't actually know what he exactly said, but there are lots of references to what typically is in it. So generically, typically, Harvey's right. This is what's in it. The painful aspects of life, craving, remember craving's the second noble truth. Painful aspects of life, dukkha, perhaps the first noble truth. And these associated mental and physical pains, the cessation of these, the third noble truth, from the cessation of craving, the solution and to the problem, the way of practice leading to this cessation, final noble truth, the noble eightfold or factored path. He then emphasized the liberating effect on him of his full insight into an appropriate response to these realities, such as that he was now a Buddha. He's trying to persuade these 5 ascetics to join him, to set out on the path. Kush says his preaching later on, it becomes so powerful that one of the 5 immediately gained insight into the truth that all arising is subject to cessation. That's word arising key, a conditional arising, cause and effect, everything has a conditional cause. And This is, Kush says, an intuitive grasp of the Buddhist teaching, known technically as the Dharma vision, the eye of the Dharma. Really a supernatural, a transcendent insight into truth. Kush goes on to say, after a further sermon, so one wasn't enough for all of these five, it was for the Kordana, the first, the nature of the self, the five completely broke through into full knowledge and liberation, became enlightened, just like the Buddha. They are not, however, called Buddhas. Were dependent upon someone else to teach them. So they were called Aryats or Arats, which means worthy ones. Kush points out that Buddha just was a gifted teacher and always taught at the level of his listener. A great example of this is when later on in his life, much later in the 45 years of teaching, he teaches 1,000 monks when he leads them to Gaia's head. And it says, you look at the picture there on the right, what kind of Dharma talk would be suitable for them? Then he realized in the past they worshipped the fire in the morning and evening. They're Hindus or Brahmins. So he says, I will teach them the 12 sense bases are burning and blazing. In this way they'll be able to attain aratship, meaning they can enter the process of becoming a Buddha. So he turns the idea of fire on its head. He uses their understanding of fire and says, no, what's on fire is bad. These are ignorance, or greed, or hatred. These are fires that need to be quenched. So the Buddhist style of teaching is generally one of skillful adaptation, Harvey says, to the mood and the concerns and the experience of his hearers, responding to the questions and even the non-verbalized thoughts of his audience, and taking cues from events. That's what Gombrich says. By means of a dialogue with his questioners, he gradually moved them towards sharing something of his own insight with reality. Harvey goes on to say, when Brahmins asked him about how to attain union with the god Brahma after death, he said this could only be attained by meditative development of deep loving kindness and compassion, rather than the bloody Vedic sacrifice. He's not afraid to argue and criticize, isn't he? He often gave old terms, Harvey says, to new meanings. And, for example, talking of the Arat as the true Brahman. Wow. And using the term Arya, equivalent to the Sanskrit term noble Aryan people, in the sense of spiritually noble or noble. So he's pillaging the language of the old Brahmanism. The Buddha treated questions in a careful, analytic way. Some he answered directly, others he answered after first analyzing them so they could clarify the nature of the question. Some he answered with a counter-question to reveal concealed motives and presuppositions. Others he set aside as question-begging fraught with misconceptions. Famously, there are some questions the Buddhists and the Buddha won't answer. Where did the universe come from? Do we have a soul? Other abstract philosophical questions that don't lead to enlightenment. He set aside these questions. Harvey says he didn't mind if others disagreed with him, but censored misrepresentations or interpretations of what he taught. He showed even mindedness when gaining disciples. Famously, this general who was a supporter of Jain monks decided to become a lay disciple, but the Buddha advised him that such a prominent person should think carefully before changing his religious allegiances. Interesting. The Buddha emphasized that one should not make the mistake of mistaking belief for knowledge, and the importance of self-reliance and the experiential testing out of all teachings, including his own. So people say Buddhism is sort of pragmatic. Only occasionally, for example, before his first sermon did he use his authority. But this was not to force people to agree with him, but to get them to listen so that he could gain understanding. Harvey says when Brahmins further asked him about how to attain union with the god, we'll stop there.